Hello, Namaste and welcome you all. Today in this lecture, we are going to take new problem on marginal costing technique. So let's start. The costing data of Sai Limited is given in this table. The variable cost, which is 80% of sales and which amounts rupees 8 lakh. Then the fixed cost, which is 10% of sales and amounts rupees 1 lakh. Then profit, which is 10% of sales, amount rupees 1 lakh. And sales, which is 100% and amounts rupees 10 lakh. With this data available, we are asked to calculate PV ratio, BP sales, margin of safety ratio and variable cost ratio. So let's start calculating PV ratio. What is mean by PV ratio? PV stands for profit volume ratio. But as we have discussed, PV ratio is not actually the profit to sales ratio, it is actually contribution to sales ratio. So PV ratio formula is contribution upon sales into 100. So what PV ratio tells us? PV ratio tells us the percentage of contribution to sales. It means suppose PV ratio is 20%, it means contribution is 20% of sales. So to calculate PV ratio, we require two variables, that is contribution and sales. Sales, which is already given, we need amount of contribution. So how to calculate the contribution? As we know, sales less variable cost is equal to contribution. So sales less variable cost, contribution is equal to sales less variable cost. So sales, which is rupees 10 lakh. So 10 lakh less variable cost, which is 8 lakh. So 10 lakh less 8 lakh is equal to 2 lakh will be the amount of contribution. So contribution is 2 lakh. So same amount of contribution now we can use to calculate the PV ratio. So PV ratio is equal to contribution upon sales. Contribution 2 lakh upon sales, which is 10 lakh. 2 lakh upon 10 lakh into 100, that is 20%. So PV ratio will be 20%. PV ratio as we have calculated, which is 20%. PV ratio is 20%, it means contribution is 20% of sales, and it means fixed cost is 20% of BP sales and profit is 20% of margin of safety sales. So here PV ratio is 20% means contribution to sales ratio is 20%. It means contribution is 20% of sales. You can see contributions 2 lakh, which is 20% of sales, rupees 10 lakh. Now we are going to calculate second item, that is BP sales. BEP sales. How to calculate BEP sales, or what is meant by BEP sales? The sales when the total cost and total sales are exactly same, and when that stage comes, when the amount of contribution becomes exactly equal to the amount of total fixed cost. That's why the formula to calculate break even point in rupees is fixed cost upon PV ratio. So why we take here the amount of fixed cost? As we have discussed, the amount of fixed cost and the amount of contribution at BP level is always equal. Amount of fixed cost and amount of contribution at BEP level is always equal. The amount of contribution at BEP level and the amount of total fixed cost is always equal. That's why we have taken amount of fixed cost as a amount of contribution at BEP level. So contribution at BEP level upon contribution ratio is equal to sales at BEP level. In that way we can calculate the BEP sales. So fixed cost which is already given, which is rupees 1 lakh. So 1 lakh fixed cost upon PV ratio which is 20%. So 1 lakh divided by 20% is equal to rupees 5 lakh will be the amount of BEP sales. So BEP in rupees is rupees 5 lakh. It means when our sales becomes 5 lakh, our total cost will also be 5 lakh. Both will become equal, and that stage is called as break even stage or no profit no loss stage. So we have calculated 2 items of the problems. Now we are going to calculate third item, that is margin of safety. So let's start calculating margin of safety. What is mean by margin of safety? It is excess of actual sales over BEP sales. It is excess of actual sales over BEP sales, or in other words we can say actual sales less BEP sales is equal to margin of safety sales. It means margin of safety is nothing but the part of total sales. When we split total sales into 2 parts, first part will be the BEP sales and second remaining part will be called as margin of safety sales. So what is formula to calculate margin of safety sales? Margin of safety sales is equal to actual sales less BEP sales. So both figures we have, actual sales already given and BEP sales we have calculated. So margin of safety is equal to actual sales 10 lakh less BEP sales which is rupees 5 lakh. So 10 lakh less 5 lakh is equal to 5 lakh will be the amount of margin of safety. Excess of actual sales over BEP sales, or actual sales less BEP sales is equal to margin of safety. The same margin of safety we can calculate alternatively by using this formula. Now we are going to see how to calculate margin of safety by using another formula. So which is that formula? Margin of safety is equal to profit upon PV ratio. So why this formula works? As we know, the amount of profit and the amount of contribution at margin of safety level. Amount of profit and amount of contribution at margin of safety sales level is always equal. That's why we have taken the amount of profit as a amount of contribution at margin of safety sales level. So contribution at margin of safety sales level divided by contribution ratio is equal to margin of safety sales. In that way this formula works. So profit which is already given, which is rupees 1 lakh. So 1 lakh profit divided by PV ratio which is 20%. So 1 lakh divided by 20% is equal to rupees 5 lakh will be the amount of margin of safety. You can see By using these two formulas, we can calculate margin of safety. Margin of safety 5 lakh, margin of safety 5 lakh. So in this way we have calculated 3 items. Now we are going to calculate third item, that is margin of safety ratio. So what is that margin of safety ratio? What it tells us, margin of safety ratio tells us the percentage of margin of safety sales to total sales. Suppose margin of safety ratio is 50%, it means margin of safety sales is 50% of total or actual sales. How? Now we are going to discuss. Fourth, margin of safety ratio is equal to, what is the formula? It is a ratio of margin of safety to sales. That's why margin of safety to sales into 100. So margin of safety, as we have calculated, which is rupees 5 lakh. So 5 lakh margin of safety divided by sales, which is rupees 10 lakh. So 5 lakh margin of safety upon 10 lakh actual sales into 100 is equal to 50%. You can see the margin of safety 5 lakh, which is 50% of sales 10 lakh. So margin of safety ratio will be 50%. So in this way we have calculated second last item also. Now we are going to calculate last item, that is variable cost ratio. So how to calculate variable cost ratio? What is the variable cost ratio? It is the ratio of variable cost to sales. And what it tells us? It tells us the percentage of variable cost to sales. Means suppose variable cost is rupees 8 and sales is rupees 10. It means that variable cost is 80% of sales. So we are now actually calculating variable cost ratio. So variable cost ratio is equal to, it is the ratio of variable cost to sales into 100. It tells us the percentage of variable cost to sales. So what is the amount of variable cost which is already given, which is rupees 8 lakh. So 8 lakh variable cost upon sales, which is rupees 10 lakh, into 100 is equal to 8 lakh upon 10 lakh into 100 is equal to 80%. It means variable cost ratio is 80%. What does it mean? Variable cost ratio is 80%. It means variable cost is 80% of sales. So in that way we have calculated all the 5 items of the problem. I hope all of you understood it. Thank you.